Hey everybody, this is Josh,
And this is Dean.
and here we are again with another chapter of finding an agent. And so this week we're going to start off, we're going to talk a little bit about Dean's queries. Dean, what have you had going on?
I have had another query that I've done. This one is by snail mail to another agent in New York. Big surprise. Um, sent out matriarchs. They wanted, I think I sent the first 10 pages along with a synopsis, which they wanted. And I recommend, creating a synopsis of your book. Now, if you did it a more traditional outline, you could probably, convert that traditional outline into a synopsis. In my case, I have a less traditional outline format, so I just kind of had to go through the book and create one. But I've got a good 3-page synopsis, and I think it really helped me, even though it took me a lot of time to write out the synopsis. It really helped me to kind of give the gist of the book and to keep that clear in my head.
This agent you said is in New York also?
Yeah.
Have you been having any trouble continuing to come up with agents, or how much search
No,
time
so
have you had
far,
to put into?
I've been doing like my internet searches, and I've just been typing it in, and I'm finding something within 10 to 15 minutes and putting it together and shipping it out. I'm just getting it down to where I don't dilly dally or try to agonize over this stuff too much. I basically, is it an agent? Do they accept snail mail? Do they want science fiction? Send it out.
And any responses on any of the others that you have pending?
I have not got any responses. I think most of the email or electronic submissions that I've made, queries I've made, have, I've gotten some kind of rejection. So now we're down to snail mail, which I've been doing for, probably a couple of months now. So we'll see how that, I'm always sending a self-addressed stamped envelope with it, and I'm saying that I don't need anything back. So we'll see how that goes. I'm curious to see if I get any kind of letter back. Hopeful that I'll get some kind of letter back from them.
Yeah. When you say you don't need anything back, you mean like returning your manuscript?
Yeah, returning the manuscript or anything I've sent. I just explicitly state that in there.
Gotcha. All right. Well, for me, on what I've been working on this week is, I did a couple of things. The biggest thing that I worked on was kind of a breakdown and analysis of the Red Phantom novel. I went through and reread the entire novel, not on a deep level, kind of a skim. And I went through and I created a new document where I outlined chapter by chapter and documented like every scene that takes place within those chapters. And then I printed that off, and I basically using that as somewhat of an outline to look at each scene and each chapter, and basically how the book falls into place, how it unfolds, and looking for consistency, and looking at each of those scenes and seeing would they be better placed in another section of the book, if they inform on something that happens in a way that it might be better if that happened earlier in the novel or what have you. And so spent my week working on that, and then also doing some rewriting on some of those scenes that I thought could either be improved upon, or if they need to be moved, perhaps they needed to be rewritten in a way that helped it fit in that area and helped with consistency. So I mostly spent time on that. And then I guess the other thing that, this is really no news, but I still have a submission pending on that short story that was pulled out of that short story collection that I have. And I'm hoping to hear something soon on that. I sent that in. The deadline for submissions on that anthology was June 1st. I a little uneasy on this one, and this is something that probably anyone that's submitted a story can be familiar with. I didn't get anything back acknowledging receipt of the submission, and that's not unusual, but it is a little bit, I don't know, I guess it creates a little bit of doubt. It's like you want to make sure that the editor received your submission, but at the same time, a lot of the editors are very particular about don't pester me about your submission. So I submitted it and I haven't heard anything. There's no posted timeline for responses either. So I'm hoping, I mean, there shouldn't be any reason why the editor didn't receive it, because on the submissions page, the email address is already put there for you. And so I just copied and pasted the editor's email address into my submission email. So there's no reason why it should not have been received unless it got blocked by a spam filter or something. I hope that's not the case, but anyway, I haven't heard anything back on that one yet. And I haven't actually received anything saying they received the submission. So there's a little bit of doubt because it's been sitting out there for so long. It's like, I hope that one didn't get lost in the internet somewhere. But anyway, so I still have that submission pending. Haven't heard anything back on that. That's pretty much been my week. So anyway,
Yeah, waiting like that for something just to get a yes or a no can be more excruciating than, you know, getting the no sometimes.
yeah, I agree. And personally, I mean, you know, I would prefer it if they would at least have some type of a quick email just to say, hey, your submission's been received. You should have an answer within the next 3 months, something like that, just to let me know that it's actually in the queue. But anyway, I don't know. I guess that's the way it goes sometimes. So anyway, what else you been doing?
I have been doing a little reading. And by reading, I mean listening to ebooks. I've gone back to a well that I explored a lot in my childhood, which was I was a huge Isaac Asimov fan when I was, I don't know, from age 10 to 16 or 17 or so. And he wrote a series of books set in a future that's, let's say, 500 years from now. And the earth basically has become, everybody lives underground and is just, you know, in these giant cities, underground cities, basically. And the first one in that series, which I'm not going to talk about too much, but I just want to, you know, briefly talk about, you know, show it, is called The Caves of Steel. And that one is set on Earth, and it's basically a detective novel, but science fiction setting. And like I said, in this, you know, these giant underground cities. He has a partner, which is a robot partner who's an android. You know, he looks human, and they're trying to solve a murder. And there are humans that live in outer space on space colonies, but they've kind of broken away and formed a very radically different society, or societies, from the humans on Earth. And they're almost like a different species because they live longer than humans. So and they're called spacers. They live to be about 200 to 300 years old, whereas humans on Earth just live to be the normal lifespan. And so, and there's a lot of friction between those two societies as a result of the very radical difference between those two societies. So the next novel in the series, which I, you know, wanted to talk a little bit more about because I think it's kind of topical to today, was called The Naked Sun. Okay. And so in that one, the main character, who's the cop from Earth, and he's just kind of like a typical, you know, cop from Earth kind of guy. He goes to one of these spacer colonies or spacer worlds to solve a murder. And I was reading this, and I had to, you know, with kind of a chuckle, because it's this spacer society where everyone lives in a huge mansion. There's only about 20,000 people on an entire planet. So they're spread out, you know, on these massive estates, and they have robots taking care of everything. So you can think of it kind of like a Southern style plantation where, like, the robots are, you know, basically their servants taking care of everything and, you know, managing everything for them. And they just kind of, you know, sit there in the lap of luxury and let the robots do everything. They have an extreme taboo against seeing other human beings in person. So they basically will talk to other people through like a three-dimensional teleconferencing type system that they have built into their houses. And that's their normal mode of communication with other people on this world. And they have like basically an agoraphobia. It's like a world of people with agoraphobia. And they never want to see other people in person. So they freak out and, you know, have extreme, you know, kind of psychological reaction to other people when they see them in person. And so he's going around trying to solve this crime of a murder. And it's just, to me, I was like, well, this is COVID. I was like, this is like pretty much like how, half the country wants to have us live for the rest of our lives, which is we're going to all telecommute to work, on Zoom. We're going to like talk to everybody on Zoom. That's the other thing is like this society, they're terrified of infection. They're terrified of like even breathing the same air as other people. Cause that, and one of the characters at one point, he's saying, how disgusting is it that I even have to breathe the same air as, he's like talking about how disgusting that is. And I just thought, this almost just seems like, what we've been living for the past year and a half. And so I just, it was interesting to kind of see what I think a segment of our society and, some of our political leaders would kind of like to see us, live like for the rest of our lives. And the extreme dysfunction of the society is interesting. I mean, the only time husbands and wives see each other is for purposes of procreation. And otherwise, like they have a huge mansion and the wife has her section of the mansion and the husband has his, and they stay completely away from each other and never see each other, except for, like I said, when they meet occasionally for procreation. And of course, the government decides when you can procreate. So, you can't even get permission to procreate until such a time. And then the woman gets pregnant, and this is written in the 1950s. So they, Asimov wasn't aware of technologies that would come along like artificial insemination. But after the fetus reaches a certain stage, it's surgically removed and put into like a artificial womb type thing and grown to, maturity in an artificial womb. And then they keep all of the children in like a collective farm and raise them collectively, and take care of them and educate them collectively. And it's like, well, to me, this is like what the Democratic Party wants to see happen. It's like their ultimate utopia type society. So
Yeah,
it was interesting to see how topical it seemed.
yeah, that's pretty crazy. I was going to ask you when it was written. You said the 1950s.
Yeah, and it was written, I think, 57, and you can tell that because he never explicitly mentions sex. It's always like in oblique terms, and things like that. And I don't even think he ever says like, well, what do they do about sex? It's just like, well, husbands and wives meet for procreation, like, or, puts in those kind of oblique terms. And I'm sure he had to get it through the censors of Doubleday or whatever publishing house at that time, especially with science fiction. This is meant for mostly teenage males to read, in the 1950s.
What's the length on this? Is this like a novella or a full-length novel?
It was a short novel. I would say The Naked Sun was it'd be 250 words tops. Asimov wrote back then shorter novels. He started out as like a novella guy. The whole Foundation series, which is probably his most famous series, was actually just written as a series of novellas that were published in Science Fiction magazine.
That's interesting. I think I showed you on Apple TV. They're developing a series called the Foundation series based on that. And
go ahead.
Yeah, I wonder how they're going to structure that. I wonder.
And I don't. The problem with Asimov, and I love it, and like very kind of intellectual, thoughtful people will like it. There's a lot of talking in this. There's a lot of like just two characters, and they're like, well, let's discuss the laws of robotics and what the implications of that are. And just incidentally, for those that don't know, Asimov came up with what he called the laws of robotics, and it's like the first law is like a robot can't harm a human, and the second law is a robot has to always obey a human. And the third law is the robot protects its own existence, but then they're in level of priority. So like if second law conflicts with first law, then the robot defaults to first law. So you can't order a robot to kill somebody or to knowingly kill somebody. And in fact, in this novel, that's the mystery, because someone dies such that there was only one human present, the wife, and it looks like she did it, but they can't find a murder weapon. And then the mystery is, well, where's the murder weapon and did she do it? And I won't give it away, but the resolution of that mystery involves basically the laws of robotics and kind of an interesting quirk of the laws of robotics.
Did Asimov, is he the one who wrote I, Robot?
Yeah, and that's a series of short stories. Like that's actually the movie, the Will Smith movie, has nothing to do with with anything Asimov wrote, other than, you know, the laws of robotics, and I think are referenced in it, and that plays into the Will Smith movie. But I, Robot was actually just a series of short stories that he published over time in science fiction magazines, and that character never appears. It's like there's a female character he used a lot, and she was supposed to be like a robotics engineer type character, and then there were these other two characters who were kind of like these just action adventure dudes dealing with robots type characters. And the stories are almost always centered around like these laws of robotics, and something happens that seems mysterious, and then they're trying to solve how this could have happened in light of the laws of robotics. So it's a very deductive, it's almost like every story is like a deductive Sherlock Holmes type mystery.
With the Asimov stories, you talked about how there's a lot of dialogue where they discuss, I guess, theoretical aspects of robotics or artificial intelligence. Is that still fairly pertinent with the technological developments that we've had?
The way the thing that is important for the way we live here actually is the interaction of technology with human beings and how far technology should go. Because like the other theme in these stories basically, and like Caves of Steel and all of these, and I'll get into that a little bit with this one, this is the third book in the story series, Robots of Dawn. And this one, he's trying to solve a murder of a robot, where a robot has died inexplicably. There's always like a question of to what extent should we go with technology, and whether technology can become kind of a crutch for human beings to such an extent that it's maybe not healthy for us to have that level of technology just kind of at our fingertips. And I guess you could, you know, kind of, I think the closest thing I could think of is kind of maybe the internet today, and whether it's always healthy or good, the extent to which we're using the internet. I mean, you just saw that with COVID. I mean, has it been healthy for us as a society that we've kind of regressed to this point where we're, you know, doing everything over Zoom now and not, you know, interacting with people, and people are not wanting to go back to work and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah, well, and a little bit off topic, but kind of along those lines, you know, as we've talked about, Dean and I are both attorneys, and recently we both sat in on a continuing education class via Zoom where one of the local judges talked about the court procedures, I guess, what they've been doing with COVID and how they see that progressing now that the COVID thing is, I guess we're starting to move beyond it with people being vaccinated and things of that nature. But yeah, definitely some interesting things to consider, or at least in our line of work. For example, on this particular call, one of the things that I mentioned to Dean was there was a whole lot of discussion about what was safe and what was convenient as far as procedures, but never once during the entire presentation did we ever hear the judge mention due process rights.
Exactly.
And so I don't know, I'm not quite sure what to think about whether we're progressing or regressing in some aspects because of this COVID stuff, and the fact that technology has made it easy for us to fall into what I think are some unhealthy habits.
Yeah, and like you said, like it's becoming, it's no longer a question of what's necessary with a lot of this. It's more a question of what's convenient for people. And like you said, there's no discussion of whether using Zoom to conduct trials, especially jury trials, in any way comports with our notions of due process. And this is all being done without having had much thought about it ahead of time. It's all just kind of being done by the seat of our pants in the legal system. And I think the consequences of it have not really been thought through.
Yeah, it's kind of, we're kind of in the middle of an ongoing experiment here, which doesn't seem very healthy for justice, because you're talking about a lot of laws that have been written that outline the procedures that ensure people have due process rights and that their rights are not violated by the judicial process. And then now we have the pandemic, and that's all just kind of thrown out the window on a whim without any legislative process. Just kind of a handful of people get together and think, well, okay, what's most convenient and what's quote safe. But I guess you could have a philosophical discussion on which is more harmful, catching COVID or throwing out society's due process.
Yeah. And I think they're also sort of implicitly ceding a lot of that process to technology companies that aren't necessarily fully accountable for their actions to a large degree. Like with the court system and with the legislature, you've got, at some point they're accountable to the voters. And I think that may be a problem too.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely a lot of stuff to, I guess, observe closely and see what happens. I don't know. The cynical side of me wonders how much people really care, as long as it's convenient and expedient.
Yeah.
But
yeah. And unfortunately, I think it like with these Asimov novels, it's like these societies, they kind of were ceding their humanity to technology and were really losing their connection with other human beings. And I think there's something to be said for that face-to-face interaction and those face-to-face transactions that we have with other human beings that we've been doing since the dawn of time.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a reason why the laws have evolved to the place that they're at over the last 2,000 years. And then we've undone a lot of that in the last 12 months.
Yeah. So hopefully there will be more discussion and deliberation about that. And they'll, I'm hopeful that a lot of that they're gonna somewhat back away from over time.
I'm hopeful too, but I didn't find that education class that we sat in on to be particularly inspiring on that front, but we'll see.
Yeah, give me, like I said, it's like, the old saying used to be give me liberty or give me death, as Patrick Henry said. Now it's like give me convenience or give me death.
Yeah, pretty much. So, all right. Well, that's probably a good jumping off point for this week, unless you've got anything else.
I think that's all I got.
All right. Well, I want to try to remind everyone and encourage them to like and subscribe and leave a comment. Would love to get a dialogue going, maybe some Q&A with some of the viewers. So if you got any questions or any thoughts, post them down below and we'll talk about them. But otherwise, I guess we'll catch you next week.
Take care, folks.
Sorry, I got to start over.
I don't know why that's backwards. It's really weird.
Ah, shit. All right.
We'll get better at this as we go, I guess. And
what's going into the sausage here?
There's definitely some reflection off my head. Yeah, I may end up in federal prison.